Hey, good morning. Welcome to the Midwest Dream Car Collection. My name is Doug Malone. I'm the curator and director of vehicle operations here at the museum. And let's come on in. I'll tell you a little bit about our museum. We got our start about 6 years ago when benefactors and local residents, Ward and Brenda Morgan, went to a car auction to buy a couple of cars for themselves. Ended up coming back to Manhattan with 13. And so needed to find a place to store those cars. And so Ward and Brenda, being the generous people that they are, decided they were going to open up a car museum in Manhattan. So within just a few months, we turned their private collection into a 501c3 not-for-profit corporation. The Morgans purchased the building that we're in right now to put the museum in. And over the next 6 months, bought about 50 cars to fill the museum up. And so it was a very fast-forming museum. It was always thought of from the very beginning that the museum would have a very eclectic collection of cars. So we're not all focused on one type of car. We're not all Fords or Chevys or Ferraris or Lamborghinis. We're a mix of everything from all different types of generations. The purpose behind that is hopefully there'll be something in here for everybody's interest. Now, maybe it's a favorite car that you grew up with or that your grandparents had, or just one that you always dreamed of when you were a young person. And so we hope that our collection inspires those past memories and makes you wish for new things yet to come. So let's come on in and take a look at some of the cars that we have in our collection. But I guess before we do that, let me explain a little bit about what's out here. This is our main entry into the museum. We have our front desk here, so when you come to the museum, we'll have personnel up there that will greet you and welcome you to our museum. Our museum admission is very reasonable. It's $8 for adults and $5 for children. And then we have military discounts and senior discounts. But there's also a large gift shop here, so you can take home something to remember the museum by upon leaving. And it's an also nice area just to relax and enjoy visiting with friends and family. As we come into the museum, here in our lobby, we find our oldest vehicle. And this is an 1886 Benz patent Motorwagen. This is a replica car. This is the only replica that we have in the museum, and that's for a reason that there's only one of these cars left in the world, and it's in a museum in Stuttgart, Germany. But this is known as the first production gas-powered automobile, so really the first purpose-built car. Prior to that, there were some automobiles that were made, maybe one or two, that were engines attached to horse buggies, but this was one that was purposely built as an automobile. They made 25 of them. And Carl Benz is the one who built this and designed it in 1885 and got the patent for it in 1886. It is a single-cylinder, four-stroke engine. Not a very fast car, but for the time of 1886, it was pretty amazing engineering. This car would go about a little under 10 miles per hour. It's a little under 1 horsepower. It's powered by what was called white gas, or LaGrogne back then. There were no gas stations back then, so you actually bought the fuel for this car in a pharmacy, and it would go in here. And then you'd fill this container up here. This is your water reservoir. And then you have to put oil in these little glass bowls here, and it drips down into the cylinder. And so you have to stop this car after every few miles, check your water level because it would burn off pretty quick. It didn't circulate. Same with your oil. You have to check to make sure you had oil still in there that was dropping in and getting used, and then your fuel. So this wasn't a fast mode of transportation, but for the time it was something unique. And we can thank Carl's wife, Bertha Benz. She's really the one that got this car out on the road and tried it out. Her husband was always tinkering on it, and Bertha kind of got upset with him and said, we need to get this out so people can see it. So without her husband knowing, she loaded up her 2 sons and drove the car to her mother's house about 60 miles away. And Bertha, in her own right, was a pretty amazing lady and had some patents in her own name. But she was able to fix the things issues that came up with the car. And she drove those 60 miles. I think it took her 9 hours to get to her mother's in this car, and she had to stop at a pharmacy to get gasoline. And then, interestingly enough, that pharmacy is now known as the first official gas station. And but she made the trip, and it proved to Carl and to the world that a motorized transportation was something that maybe was in our future. So we can thank Bertha, even before Henry Ford, for putting us on wheels. As we come on over here, we'll see some early American cars. And we can thank Henry Ford for really being the one that put us on wheels in the United States. Henry Ford, a lot of people don't know, had 2 failed businesses before he had a successful one. He had the Detroit Automobile Works where he was employed as a partner, and that was a short-lived company. He then formed a partnership with two other guys to form the Henry Ford Motor Car Company. And after about a year, they had a falling out, and that company was dissolved. Interesting enough, that former Henry Ford company was turned into Cadillac Motor Car Company. So Cadillac's roots are in Ford. But when Ford left the company, he got the rights to the Ford name, I think $700, and he started the Ford Motor Car Company in 1903. And the rest, they say, is history. Henry loved cars. He loves racing. This Model R over here is one of his earlier cars. This is a 1907 Model R. This came out before the Model T. And Henry Ford improved each model year, made some changes in them. This is a very beautiful car. You notice all the brass on it, the white tires. A lot of people don't realize that the natural color of rubber is white. So all tires back in the early days were white before I started adding the carbon black to them. And that was because of ultraviolet deterioration of the tires. The black helped keep the tires preserved better and cleaner. You know, it's hard to keep a white tire clean on dirt, gravelly roads back in those early days. But, you know, the kerosene lamps on the car, these weren't necessarily designed to put a lot of light forward, but more as a awareness to let people know that you were arriving. Horses and buggies still ruled the roads back in those days, and they had most of the rules. And automobiles were kind of the accessory on the road. So, but a fascinating piece of automotive history. Henry Ford did realize, though, that if he was going to make his cars available to the general public, he was going to need to make them more affordable. Cars in those early 1900s were very expensive. They were new, and not everybody could afford them. So Henry Ford set out with the creation of the Model T. And here we have a 1920 Model T here over here. He set out with the Model T to mass produce them and to make them affordable, so even his own workers in his production plants could afford them. They started off about $895 in 1908 when the first ones came out. Interesting thing is, every year for the next 20 years that they were built, they went down in price. So by 1927, they were under $300 each. You always heard the comment you could have a Model T as long as any color was black. Well, that's kind of true, but not necessarily, because the early Model Ts before 1915, you get in a variety of about 5 or 6 different colors. It wasn't until he modernized the assembly line for automobiles, and he's credited with having the first automotive assembly line. That's not really true because Oldsmobile did, but Henry Ford was the first one to motorize the assembly line. And but he found out that black paint dried the quickest, and he wanted to be able to create and produce cars very rapidly, and so he said they were all going to be black. Because back then you didn't spray paint cars. You dipped the fenders and the hoods in paint, hung them up to dry. That's what we can always tell an original paint job on a Model T. It typically will have runs on it or not be really perfect. But the Model T took off. People loved it. They'd use it on farms. You could convert it to use as farm equipment. Some ladies even took the rear wheels off and used it to help run like washing machines for laundry. Some were converted to snowmobiles. So it was a very popular vehicle. And so over the next, from 1907, or 1908, I should say, till 1927, he sold 15 million Model Ts. And if Henry Ford would have had his way, they would have never stopped producing the Model T. But his son Edsel Ford was the one that convinced him they needed to modernize and change their bodies. And so much to his dad's, I don't know what the word would be, uphill battle with his dad, Henry Ford did finally consent to it. We came with the Model A, which we see an example right here next to us. Henry Ford saw that Ford sales were starting to go down. Chevrolet, Chrysler, Buick, Cadillac, all these other car companies that were now in creation in the 1920s were starting to make headwind on Fords. And so when they came out with the Model A, it was designed to be more luxurious. In fact, the advertisements would even show sometimes them being driven by chauffeurs, so they're catered to anybody, whether they be very wealthy or middle class or lower class. Anybody could afford these cars. You'll start to see the chrome radiator shells. You'll see electric lighting. We see the wire-spoked wheels, the more enclosed cabs in them, nicer seating, electric starts, rumble seats in some of them. 4-passenger, 2-passenger, all different types of models, different colors, beautiful different colors. It's kind of a deep blue on this one. more easier to shift transmission. We got rid of the awkward pedal shifting on the Model T, which we saw with the using of 3 pedals instead of a gear shift. So Model A took off and was very successful. And as we say, the rest is history, because Ford did very well and is still in business today. As we come over into this area of our lobby, we have a lounge. This is open to anybody who wants to use it. That's a nice place to relax. When we opened our museum 5 years ago, we were the first in Kansas to have a self-serve wine and beer wall, which you can see over here. So if you're of age and want to enjoy a beverage while you're looking at our cars, you're welcome to, when you check in, let them know. They will check your IDs and give you a prepaid card that you can insert into the wall there and pour yourself a glass of beer or a glass of wine to enjoy while you're touring the museum. We also have a soft drink machine over here. Just a nice place to relax, either before or after your trip to the museum. Let's come on around here. We'll come into the main area. Before we look at some of the cars, I'll show you some of the other highlights of our museum, and one of them is our kids zone playroom. We have a lot of kiddos that come and visit our museum, and as we all know, those of us who have kids or grandkids, it's easy to hold their attention for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they want to go do something else. And so we developed this playroom in here so kids could come in here and play with Legos or read books or play with the cars on the track. Just enjoy themselves in a nice area where parents can sit in here with them and still see out into the display floor, take a little break to get chilled back out before coming back out onto the display floor. It's just a fun room. We also have an event center here at the museum, so we welcome groups of all types. We've had graduation parties, weddings, rehearsal parties. We have chamber meetings, business meetings, Christmas parties, all different types of things. We have a large room in here that's available to rent out. And the room right now was set up because we had an educational meeting in here last Saturday. But we can open up the whole room, or the room can be divided in half. You can rent out half of it. We have tables that we can set up. We can have a seating for 150 people for sit-down meals. We can open these large garage doors here to expand out into the museum floor for different events. We have some like chamber business after hours and meetings here where we use the whole display floor as well as the event center. It's just a nice area to hold a meeting because it's a fun place. You know, so many meetings are held in hotels. And so you have breakout sessions. Everybody goes out and stands in the hallway and talks. Well, what a fun place to come here and you go out and look at cars and talk about the cars while you have a breakout session. Sometimes it's a little hard to get people back in, but it's a fun place for an event. And so if you're interested in having an event here, contact Sherry Menick here at the museum. She's our events programs director, and she'd be glad to visit with you about that. We also have a caterer's kitchen back behind. We have a list of caterers that are approved to use here at the museum. They can come in and get the food ready back here, refrigerator, ice machine, those types of things. So it makes it nice for caterers to have this kind of a facility. Go back out here on the display floor, some more of the cars. I was trying to get some a little bit newer cars out here. Two of the ones that are very prominent as you come into the display floor are the Cadillac V-16. This is a 1930 Cadillac V-16. This was the first year for the V-16 engine. Cadillac came with that to compete against Packard and Duesenberg cars. This car before us was owned by Atwater Kent. Atwater Kent back in the 1930s, 1920s was probably the wealthiest man in the United States. He made his money building Atwater Kent radios, which we can see a 1930 model of right here. So he was a very wealthy man by 1930, and so this was his personal car at the time. These cars were very grand. You can just see by all the chrome, all the lights on these cars. The driving lights here actually turn with the steering wheel to follow the road. You have your dual klaxon horns. The beautiful Flying Goddess Cadillac emblem, which was introduced that year. The chrome gravel grille. the covered spare tires with the very ornate mirrors mounted to them, the dual floodlights. Just a very glamorous car for the period. But these cars were anywhere from about $7,000 to $9,000 in 1930. That was a lot of money. And of course, what happened in 1929 with the stock market crash, the beginning of the Depression, made it very hard for a lot of people to be able to afford these cars. So sadly, the V-16 phased out about 7 or 8 years later. But during its time, it was very grand and made a statement when you drove one of these around on the road. Something else fun about this car is the trunk in the back. And this is where the name trunk comes from. It's physically a trunk, but this one is set up specifically for the Cadillac owner. And you had suitcases you could take in the house and pack your suitcases. And these suitcases are really finely lined. Let me open this up and show you. Beautiful fabrics on the inside of these suitcases. These were all part of a Cadillac option at the time. But you could pack these in here and then go down the road and have your clothing and items kept secure in the car. This car right over here is one of our earlier ones. This is a 1909 Peerless. Peerless back in the early 1900s was one of what was known as the 3 Ps. The 3 Ps were Peerless, Packard, and Pierce Arrow. Our museum currently does not have a Pierce Arrow. If you owned one of those cars, you were living life right, because those were very glamorous, very luxurious, very fast cars at the time. This is a Model 25 Raceabout. This is a very rare model. This is probably the only one left in the world that we're aware of, the Model 25 Raceabout. Beautiful apple green finish. Here again, you notice all the brass on this car. It's part of the brass era of motor cars. We have 2 different types of lighting. We have acetylene gas lamps and kerosene. We didn't have electric lamps on cars yet. Still a crank start car. This is an 825 cubic inch 6-cylinder engine car. It's a very powerful car for 1909. This car would go over 100 miles an hour back in 1909. I don't know where you'd find a road to be able to go that fast, but it was a very fast and beautiful car. One of the newest acquisitions we have in our museum is our 1948 Tucker. We just acquired this in March of this year. We're extremely fortunate to have one of these in our collection. This car was introduced by Preston Tucker in 1948. He tried to start his own car company. Unfortunately, the government and some senator and the Securities and Exchange Commission got after him, thought he was committing fraud because he was selling accessories for the car before we actually had a car built. But it was a beautiful car. They only ended up making 50 of these. This is one of 50 that was originally produced. There's 46 of them that survived. This is number 17. These cars are highly sought after. You typically find these cars. I know there's one in the Smithsonian. You'll find one in the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles, the AACA Museum up north. Most all of them are in museums now. I think there's about a dozen that are still privately owned. But now this one's here in Manhattan. And these cars go for high dollar when they sell at auction or otherwise, and are highly sought after. So the fact that we have one in Manhattan, Kansas, says a lot about the type of museum that the Morgans have helped us to acquire. I should say all these cars have been donated by the Morgan family that are owned by the museum. I have some also in here that are owned by other people that I reach out to and ask if we can borrow their car for a short time. But all these cars, like our Tucker here, when the museum went to purchase this car, we reached out to the Morgans and said, hey, will you donate the money to the museum so we can afford this car? And they graciously did. So most everything in here is through the generosity of Ward and Brenda Morgan that we've been able to acquire. Another rare car that we have is this 1937 Ford Supercharged Sportsman. Ford was the first American car with front-wheel drive. Came out in 1929. They were the first car with retractable headlights. And these are interesting. You crank them up with a hand crank on the dash. You have to crank up each one individually. But you know, it's a beautiful Art Deco look. The Ford was the first one to have the radiator completely underneath the hood, so you don't see the massive radiator exposed. You see the massive exhaust pipes coming out. These are on the supercharged cords. The non-supercharged cords would not have these exhaust pipes out the side. We have the rear hinge door with the hidden hinges. So the door opens up like this. We don't have any running boards on this car. Due to the front wheel drive configuration, the car could sit lower, so we didn't need step boards to get into the car, running boards. Very smooth back, notice like the pontoon fenders. One of the first cars to have the tail lights built into the car, not as a separate pod. Beautiful bumpers with the bumper guards. Locking gas cap, one of the first cars to have a locking gas cap. So a lot of features on the Accord really stood out, including the electric hand transmission. We can see the very unique control on this car. You notice there's no gear shift on the floor. Most cars in the 1920s, 30s had a stick shift, which was in the way if you were a passenger ride in the middle. So Bendix developed this for Hudson motor cars, and it was you shift it with using your finger, and it's electronic, so it goes by wires to a solenoid to a vacuum motor to the gears. So it's a little bit of a complicated system, but it works. When it works and it doesn't work, it can fail pretty quickly, but it's pretty reliable. But the Accord had that transmission, as did the Tucker. The 1948 Tucker used that pre-select transmission as well. Of course, the kids always liked the one right behind us, this 1927 fire engine. This truck was actually based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, since it was new. The Sinclair Oil Refinery down there bought it new in 1927 and kept it until 1959. Then went in storage for about 10 years before it went into private collections. The gentleman that owned it right before we bought it a few years ago was a retired fireman who had the car or the truck restored. It still has all of its original fire equipment. It does look, run, and operate just like it did in 1927. Of course, the kids like the sirens, so we generally let them hear that when they come, and I'll play it here for you. You got to crank it. Of course, the bell. So that's always a hit with the kiddos when they come in. Let's walk on down a little bit further. You see we have some other 40s cars, some beautiful 1950s Cadillacs. A beautiful 1951 Hudson, this convertible right here. For those of you who ever watched the cartoon movie Cars back in 2006, remember Doc Hudson? And so this is the same type of car. His was a 1951 Hudson Hornet, just like this one, except his wasn't a convertible. They only made 551 convertibles. So this is a very rare car for 1951. Finished in beautiful Broadway blue with the blue interior, leather interior. We have automatic transmission in this car, power windows, power roof, this things that weren't heard of in 1951. So a very luxurious car and one of our favorites here at the museum. Over here we have a couple celebrity cars. These are 1966 Mustangs. These were actually gifted to Sonny and Cher, the entertainers, back in 1966 by Ford Motor Car Company. Ford Motor Car wanted George Barris, the famous customizer, to make these special for Sonny and Cher. If you've never heard of George Barris, think of like the Batmobile and the Munsters car from the Munsters television show and some of those types of cars. George Barris built all those. But George Barris, the gentleman in the middle picture there, who sat down with Sonny and Cher to design what their cars were going to look like. This is the end result. And they're pretty wild. And we have people in here at the museum that go, man, I don't know about these. I said, well, you have to remember this is 1960s. This is Hollywood entertainment. And once you pull those pieces of the puzzle together, these make complete sense. But you're right. These are out there with the faux fur floor coverings, the animal print seat covers, the suede sides. Cher's has a very, very vibrant pink floor covering. They both have 8-track players, which were newly introduced that year. So that's something unique to these cars. We've got an album in the back of this one with some Sonny and Cher music on it. But yeah, these were personally built for Sonny and Cher back in the day. Come on around this way, we've got a couple of micro cars. A 1957 BMW Isetta with the unique front hinge door. And you can see, I always call this the ultimate in tilt steering, but you get in this car, when you close the door, the steering wheel comes down to greet you. And so very unique 2-passenger car. I guess you could put 3 in here if you wanted to squeeze in. Engines in the rear, but a fun little car to buzz around town in. Right beside us is a 1948 Messerschmitt. 1946 Messerschmitt, 56 Messerschmitt, I'm getting confused here. This was designed for Messerschmitt. Used to make Messerschmitt fighter planes during World War II. After the war, they were banned from making planes for 10 years. So Fritz Friend designed this car for Messerschmitt. It looks very much like an airplane with the bubble top and the way the steering wheel's done. But these sold very well, both overseas, and a lot of them were imported in the United States. But a fun little vehicle, little two-stroke engine. It's a very noisy little car, but it's fun to drive. I wouldn't want to drive it on the highway, but for around town, it's a lot of fun. I always get asked, well, how do you get in this car? Well, it's actually more roomy than you think. So the whole top opens up, and you can just slip right in. I'm 6'2". I can fit in this car just fine. The pedals are clear up in the nose of the car. You shift it over here on the right. It's just very much like a motorcycle. You just keep advancing it forward, first, second, third. To go in reverse, you have to shut the car off, push the key in, restart it. That starts the engine in reverse. So then you have 4 speeds going in reverse. So then to restart going forward, you have to shut the car back off, turn the key without pushing it in, and that starts the engine in the other direction. So it's a unique way to drive this car, but fun little vehicle and a part of automotive history. Our Amphicar is not currently on the display floor because we're getting ready to take it out next week. We do a members picnic every year out at the lake where we give rides in the car and demonstrate it. And so if you want to become a member of the museum, you'll get invited to that every June. We take out the river pond area, and a little video here shows it getting ready to go into the water. But it's a car that you can drive on land, and then you can drive right in the lake, and it takes off next like a boat. So it's a very unique car. It was built in Berlin, Germany. About 90% of them were imported in the United States. It was safety regulations that changed in 1967-68, which no longer allowed them to be sold in the United States. So that kind of was the demise of the Amphicar company. But for about 6 or 7 years, it was a popular little car back in the 60s. We have some race cars, like this Formula race car here, IndyCar. And we have a couple of NASCARs over here. This Camaro. And then we have another one that we'll take you back in a moment and show you back in our back room. Then this is Copo Camaro. This is a 2019 Copo Camaro based off the ones that came out in 1969. They made 69 of them for that year, so this is one of 69 produced in 2019. This car has never been driven outside of unloading it from the truck to bring it in here to the museum, but as a nod to those early 1969 Copo Camaros. I mentioned earlier we have some cars that are on loan to the museum, and there's a few of them down here. This little Formula SAE car was built by students up at Kansas State University. Part of the Power Cat Motorsports team up there. They design and build these cars and race them competitively all around the country every year. And so we have one of their cars on display currently for people to enjoy and see the hard work and engineering that those engineering students up at K-State put into building these little race cars. This Corvair is a car that we have on loan currently. These are the rear engine cars that Ralph Nader had such a fit over back in the 1960s, saying they're unsafe at any speed, which later was proven baseless, that they were safe if you drove them normally. But this is a 1965 Corvair convertible. The big blue one down here is a 1979 Lincoln Continental Mark V, and it's on loan to us from a gentleman up by Emporia, Kansas. Beautiful, all original car. Never had anything done to it. We have quite a few Corvettes in our collection, including an original 1953 Corvette. That was the first year for the Corvette. That's the white one here in the middle. They only made 300 of these cars that first year. They're all finished in polo white with red interiors. All had the Blue Flame 6-cylinder engine, automatic transmissions. So not very powerful, but very sporty for the time, and was the beginning of Corvette. To the left of it, we have a 1963 Chevy Corvette Stingray. This was the first year for a hardtop availability. It's also the only year for the split rear windows. These are very valuable in rare Corvettes. We have a very nice example here on our display floor. And to the right, we have a newer 2019 Corvette ZR1, which is the high-performance version of the Corvette. So we come around over here. We have a 1970 Plymouth Superbird. This is a NASCAR that was designed and built for the purpose of getting Richard Petty back into racing, and it was successful. So these also had to be sold through dealerships at the time. They didn't sell real well because people didn't like the big wing on the back of them, but it was a very highly valuable and collectible car today. Such a beautiful design that we hired an artist in England to build us a wire sculpture of ours. And Benedict Radcliffe, who is a wire sculptor, so has works of art all around the world, designed and built this for us about 3 or 4 years ago in London, and we had it shipped over. Took him about 6 months to complete. He built this car without actually having a physical car in front of him. These are built off of blueprints and schematics. He did an amazing job for a 1-to-1 scale model, down to the final details of the lug nuts and the Goodyear spelled on the tires and everything. Just extremely well done and fun art piece here in our museum. Of course, here at the museum, we're a fan of all cars, including electric cars. We have a very early 2010 Tesla Roadster. As we know that Tesla got a start in 2008 with the Roadster. This is a 2010 model. Fun little car to drive, very fast for the Peerless, like 135 miles an hour. For the early electric car, that was pretty darn fast. We also have a Tesla Model X that we don't currently have on display floor. But we've had some other electric vehicles on loan to the museum, including recently a Hummer, a new Hummer, and a Rivian, and a Ford electric Lightning truck. So we've had some fun electric vehicles on display over the past year. Have a very rare 1999 Nissan Skyline R34 GTR V-Spec. If you're into video games or some of Paul Walker's movies, Fast and Furious movies, you're very familiar with this car. This is highly sought after in the JDM fan club of ownership. They only allowed 12 of these to be imported in the United States. And in Midnight Purple 2, this was here on a show and display certificate. Since they weren't legal to be imported, we had to get permission from the National Highway Traffic Administration to have this car in our collection. And until it becomes 25 years old, which it just did. So this car is now released from that regulation and can be sold and driven as you wish. But one of the 12 original cars that were here legally in the United States. And so fortunate to have this, especially in this rare Midnight Purple 2, the most highly sought after car for the GTR. Over here we have some supercars. We have a couple of Ferraris, like this 2010 Ferrari 458 Italia, or the 2006 456. And then we have a couple of Ford GTs, this 2006 Ford GT that is the museum's car. And then we have on loan the 2021 Ford GT that's owned by our benefactor, Ward and Brenda Morgan. Beautiful example of performance cars. We also have a nice Lamborghini, a really nice Lamborghini over here. This 2014 Lamborghini Aventador. This car was originally owned by Mario Andretti, the famous race car driver. He owned this car, put about 6,000 miles on it before he traded it in for something new. And amazing vehicle. It's kind of fun the way the scissor door works. So I'll show you that, how that opens up. It's always a hit with the kids here in the museum. And Mario Andretti even signed this car for us. And here's a picture of him doing so. He says, "Please take care of my car, Mario Andretti." I guess I should pop the front and let you see that signature. There, we can see it right down here. And we have a Lamborghini tractor. A lot of people don't realize that that's where he got his start, was building tractors after World War II. His parents were grape farmers. He wasn't into grape farming. And so he was using leftover surplus war materials to start building tractors. Became very successful in the tractor business, so was able to purchase a Ferrari or two. Loved his Ferraris, but they had a clutch issue. And he figured out how to fix the clutch. The story goes that he went to Enzo Ferrari and wanted to partner up with them in making vehicles. And Enzo Ferrari didn't take it very kindly and told him to stick to building tractors and that he would stick to building cars. So Lamborghini started building cars in competition to Ferrari. But anyway, still make Lamborghini tractors to this day. We bought this one 2 years ago, had it shipped in from Italy, and it had been farming about 6 years ago. It was actually being used on a farm in Italy before it was restored. So fun story behind the Lamborghini origins. So that's why we have a tractor next to the other Lamborghini car. We have some Volkswagens. We have this 1973 Volkswagen Thing. These are very popular back from about 1968 to 1974. Sold a lot in the United States. Funky little convertible vehicle. In our entryway lobby, you may have seen when you came in, is a 1963 Volkswagen Samba bus, 23 window, which is an extremely rare version of the microbus. And then we also have a 1957 VW Bug that's currently on display. This little car is a 1967 Sunbeam Tiger II. This has a Carroll Shelby tie to it. In the 1960s, Sunbeam was wanting to compete with some of the little sportier cars that were more powerful at the time, and so they ended up partnering with Carroll Shelby. Carroll Shelby put a 260 V8, got rid of the four-cylinder, dropped a 260 V8 into this car, and called it the Sunbeam Tiger. Well, about mid-1960s, Chrysler was in the process of buying Sunbeam out from the Roots Group, and when Carroll Shelby found out about that, and that Chrysler was going to kill this car off because they didn't want a Ford engine in a Chrysler car, last 536, he dropped the Shelby Cobra 289 V8 into it and called him Tiger II. So this is a very powerful little car with that huge 289 engine in it, 4-speed manual transmission, and it's a blast to drive. This is probably one of the nicest examples left in existence. This was restored by Brad Jenkinson out in California. This is an engine numbers matching car, very professionally done, and highly sought after and becoming more so as the years go on. And of course, no museum would be complete without a very nice example of a pickup truck. And we have several pickup trucks in our collection. This one of the nicest. This is a 1969 Chevy C10 Custom, beautifully restored example in the correct color, correct interior fabrics. Just a very nice example of the cars and the trucks that we grew up with back in the late 60s, early 70s. These trucks have become very valuable in today's collector car market, but this is an extremely nice example here in our museum. That kind of wraps up the main view of the cars on display. So let's go back and take a peek in our back room, see what we've got back there. This is the room where we store our cars that we don't have on our display floor. So we'll take a peek back here so you can see how we store things back here. We have 7 dual lifts, so we can put up to 14 cars in the air, another 14 down below. These are all vehicles that have either been on the display floor or are going to be coming back out. Some have been on the display floor and are getting ready to be sold by the museum to make room for new ones. Some examples we see up here is a 1912 Maxwell, a 1940 International truck. Other side of that's kind of hidden. It's a 57 Chevy Custom Resto Mod. Here we have our 57 VW Beetle that we were talking about just a little bit ago. It was having some work done on it, so it's getting ready to come out here again pretty soon. Of a 1954 Ford Custom line. This is a one-owner car until it came here to the museum. Extremely well cared for. Beautiful example of a mid-1950s family Ford car. Other side of it is a 1950 Ford F1 pickup truck. Here we have our 2018 Tesla Model X that we bought when Model X's were first came out. A 2020 Corvette C8, first for the rear engine, mid-engine car. Beside it's a 1941 Cadillac Series 62 convertible, very beautifully restored, a 1941 Cadillac. And here's a fun Model T we have. This is a 1920 Model T pickup truck that was converted to a snowmobile. A guy by the name of Virgil White, back in the early 1900s, was a Ford dealer, and he saw that the Model Ts were getting bogged down in the snow, and people who needed to be able to get through, like physicians and mill people and even undertakers and things like that, he's devised this kit that you could transform your Model T into a snowmobile. So when you bought the kit, you got the skis for the front. You take the wheels off and put the skis on there. And you got the additional axle and the tracks and things like that, and a different transmission to put into the vehicle. And so you could buy the kit separately for $400, or you could buy the kit already installed on a new Model T for $750. And so he sold quite a few of these. You had to buy them through Ford dealerships, it's my understanding, but they were very popular for a while. There's a whole car club behind these now, that people that collect these. They meet several times a year in the wintertime and take them out and drive them in the snow and ice. We're waiting for us to get enough snow here in Manhattan. We'd like to take this one out and try it out. But this is a fully restored one. There's not very many of these left. I think probably fewer than a couple hundred of these left in the world. But this is a nicely restored one that's in our collection now. This Hearse here has a story behind it. This is a 1967 Cadillac Hearse that was modified by George Barris, and it's been in several different ownerships. The last owners before we bought it was the band, the Motley Crue. Used this for their last tour. This car has been at the Playboy Mansion. This car has been in the movies. Paris Hilton's driven this car. It's had some history behind it. So it's been in our collection. It's been on our display floor. We always put it out every year for Halloween out in front. But just as a fun example of a modified Hearse from the 1960s. Up here we have a 1928 Oakland that was donated by one of our volunteers who passed away. He was our first volunteer here at the museum, so that was his personal car and a rare Oakland model. We have a 1999 Ford NASCAR that we typically have on the floor. It's been off for a little while now. A 1958 Edsel Pacer convertible. That'll probably be coming back out on the floor again here next rotation through. We have a 2003 Honda Accord cutaway car. This car was built by Honda to show how the structure and how the cars are put together. We assume it was probably used in the factory. This car was donated to our museum by the Peterson Museum out in Los Angeles. It's been on the floor. It'll probably come out again. And then we'll probably donate it to some other museum after that. So this kind of shows you where we store things that aren't in use or being worked on. We have a full-time mechanic that works on all of our cars, typically Monday through Friday, keeps them running, keeps the oil changed, keeps the batteries up to speed. That kind of finishes our brief tour through the museum. Thank you for joining us today. We invite you to come to the Midwest Dream Car Collection and see these cars in person. We do routinely change out the vehicles several times a year. We bring out some new cars, and it's just a fun place to come visit. Bring your families. It's a family-friendly place. We can give guided tours, kind of like what we had today, and go into more detail on each of the cars. Or you're just welcome to walk around and look on your own. In front of each car is a sign that will talk about the car. Some of the signs have QR codes where you can zoom in on them, the QR code, and learn a lot more about the vehicles. We're just a fun place to come in central Kansas and in Manhattan, and hope that you'll come visit us soon.